to Voice for Advocates. I'm here with Libby and Elizabeth, and we're going to start off tonight's live stream and podcast with an introduction of each of us because I've noticed that we've had a great deal of new people finding our groups and our work, and that is so exciting. So let's start off with Libby.
Okay, so I'm Libby Lavette, and I got into environmental advocacy after I had an experience in the city of Edgewater where a canal near my home, I noticed it was accumulating muck and debris. It looked like there was a carpet of green something. And I had some friends and some environmental groups in South Florida, and I saw some things that looked bad, and I thought we should clean it up. The city didn't want to, so I organized a group of people to do it. And unfortunately, the water was toxic. There were 4 different types of toxins in there. One was registered with the EPA as chemical warfare and can cause instant death. Luckily, I didn't die, but my lungs are permanently scarred, and it's something I'll battle for the rest of my life. Also, as you know, Stel, because of your experience with cancer, it's something we always worry about when we've been exposed to these toxins because many of them are cancer causing or carcinogenic. So we worry about those things and we want to warn others. And that's how I got into the advocacy. I naturally, organically ended up in the lagoon, Indian River Lagoon, the Mosquito Lagoon in the city of Edgewater, because that very canal discharged directly into the lagoon. And I was concerned that these toxins were getting into our river. So there we go. I ended up fighting for clean water. I met you, Stel. We started working down in Titusville together on their clean, not so clean water issues. And here we are today, still doing it.
I don't think we stop. Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth Baker, and I accidentally got into this as well. I started picking up litter in my community to get some exercise. I wasn't somebody that wanted to go get on a treadmill, and realized how much garbage there really was on our roadsides, and started really understanding things about plastic pollution, which led me into researching about PFAS, and that's how I ended up meeting Stel. And it just kind of snowballed from there, and now I've been volunteering with Fight for Zero for several years and started my own business picking up litter on commercial properties.
And one of my really good friends, Cheryl, the way she puts it, because she's also an advocate and she's on the West Coast, and she's like, I just believe that we're all woven together like a basket, and we find each other and it becomes this amazing support system. So I'll introduce myself. I am Stel Bailey. I got into this work because back in 2013, that was 10 years ago, believe it or not, my uncle, our family dog, my little brother, my father, myself were all diagnosed with cancer. And that led me on this incredible journey of learning about environmental health. In my medical documents, it was put in there by my doctor that our cancer was likely environmentally caused. And I started doing in-depth research. I got suspicious about where I grew up. I was asked by numerous experts, where did you grow up? I kept telling them I grew up on Florida's Space Coast. And from there, I learned that there was cancer-causing chemicals in our water and that we had some of the highest levels of it in the nation. And it's unfolded into just this incredible journey of advocacy, challenges. There's my stories out there. It's I just had Japan come. We did a documentary. I've been talking to outlets out in France. It's kind of just overwhelming for me because I never thought this would be my life today. I always thought I would stay in the career I was in, and it really navigated off that path. But I'm really grateful that it did. So I want to start off tonight's conversation. We typically do these weekly live discussions on Fridays, and we're going to be doing a lot more of these videos throughout the week with advocates across the state and the nation. So we're excited about that. We've been doing these for almost 2 months now, and we're learning a lot with the technology and how to run this program, and I think it's getting only better. We're learning as we go, and you guys are on that journey with us. So this week, we received from the city of Titusville E. coli results. And before that, in August, it was a couple weeks back, Fight for Zero decided to take our own samples. Elizabeth collected those samples, and then she was with me when we mailed them out. And when we got them back, I honestly thought the numbers were going to be bad, but I was not anticipating the laboratory to tell me that it was going to be too numerous to count. So that was an interesting find, to say the least. I guess we should never be too surprised about these results that come in, but it was too numerous to count, which means it was really astronomical. And then the city's testing really backed that up when their testing came out this past week. So we know we're on the right track. We know that we're learning as we go, as we take these samples. What are your thoughts on both those tests and how they kind of
can I
yeah,
that? First of all, I just want to say it's so great to be listened to, because we weren't ignored this time, and they discovered that we were onto something. They were able to confirm what we discovered and able to actually identify a little more than what we discovered. And now they're looking at where's the source. It's taken us a long time to get them to the place where they're acknowledging this and are actually going to actively look for the source. So that is huge. I don't want that to be swept under the rug or ignored in any way. We really need to applaud the city of Titusville, because I honestly, truly never believed this day would ever come. I really didn't. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate Ms. Fayed from DEP. I really do believe that her involvement and oversight has just kind of lended an extra sense of doing the right thing to this. I don't know how really to word that in a sophisticated way, but like, all eyes are on, and it's clear that they're minding their P's and Q's, and I'm grateful for that. We're now looping the Department of Health in, and we're going to ask them to do their job. They put up a sign. They're investigating. There's going to be more repetitive testing going on in the area. So we look forward to sharing those results with the community. I think personally, we need to start getting some funds together to have some tests of our own. As I've explained before, we have to go through a whole lot to get these tests. We have to identify where we're testing, what we're testing. It changes by location and by characteristics. And that takes time to get them in and respond to a situation and to test it and get accurate data that's in real time. So I really think we need to get some more of these tests, because but for you doing that test, Elizabeth, and Stel, you getting it in and paying for it, and Fight for Zero paying for it, we don't know that we would have had this response. And I would venture to say we wouldn't. So we're actually getting to the source of where it's coming from finally. And I think 100% that's because you tested and you published the results, and that put the pressure on them to test. And they did. So
and you're right. It shows the importance of citizen science. And a lot of times, most government entities, not in this situation, this is exactly how a government entity should react when independent testing comes out, is in the manner that they're doing it, testing right in the same area. They did it not just once. I just pulled up the map. They did it in 3 different spots. If you look at the map, the red circle is where they hit really high. And the area of concern, they even put where we tested. So that's where we tested. And if you look at the orange on this photo, that is where all the pipes were. And there's that one really, really big pipe where the red circle is. If you look at the orange, follow it to the Spaceview Park ponds. That is back in 2020 when that massive sewage spill happened. That was the pipe that Libby, this pipe right here, it's massive. That's the one that she kayaked out to. The Indian River Lagoon is right there. And then Spaceview Park, it goes all the way down to those ponds. But you're right. The testing, having those kits on hand would be tremendous. It's costly to do. I don't think people realize the cost of testing, and it does, a lot goes into it. We have to, because we're limited on funds, we want to make sure that we're using the test when appropriate. So for instance, a perfect example of that is Scobie Park, right? We ordered this test because we were initially going to test Scobie Park because we thought there's something really crazy going on here. There's a lot of things that are pointing towards sewage, and we always want to back up our theories with science, data, and testing. That is what sets us apart from a lot of advocacy groups, because we don't just sit online and complain about an issue. We're taking action to find out what the issue is. And then we typically get action in finding resolutions, solutions to those issues. And in this case with Scobie Park, now we've got the Bavard Zoo looking into doing the shoreline and helping us bring that back to life and helping the horseshoe crabs. And so that's the good news that comes out of it. A lot of our advocacy and awareness, and I know some people look at it and they're like, why do they keep showing us, giving us insight into, the manatee unusual mortality event? Why do they do this? Because we have brought so much funding by putting this in our legislators and our politicians' faces and saying, if you don't fund this, this is your next campaign. This is your legacy. This is what is going to happen if you don't start investing and start actually taking this situation seriously. And so that there are so many great things that come out of the work that we do. And oftentimes I do feel like it goes unnoticed because we're not the ones that are getting the funding. And in order to do projects, and in order to do that shoreline restoration, in order to do the testing, we need funding. So the organizations that are getting the funding, they're the ones doing the projects. But we take great pride in the fact that we're helping all of these other organizations help the Indian River Lagoon, because at the end of the day, we all have the same goal. And that's to clean up the Indian River Lagoon and get it to a point where we're stopping the sources of pollution and we're not adding to it. And it gets back to a thriving, living lagoon. I don't know if you guys want to add more of like some of the positives that have come out of this. I mean, you talked about how Titusville has done. So it's a different, I agree with you, Libby.
Night and day.
Different world. It's a whole different world, and having some new faces in control, and that is really, really nice. I really appreciate Kevin Cook and everything that he is doing. His communication with us has been wonderful. He seems like he's somebody that really does care about human health. He doesn't want to see anybody hurt. They're all aware of the fact that, there was a kid paralyzed in that water. There's a lawsuit going on. I won't go too much into that, but, there was a kid literally paddleboarding in that water and ended up very, very ill and could have lost his life. But he's paralyzed. And, something that I really want to point out here is that this whole particular situation also happened on accident. I went to Scobie Park looking at the garbage that was in the park. And that was in early June. And I kept saying, oh my God, this water looks horrible. Why is it red? What is that stringy looking substance in there? What is this? And it was like daily that I was going out there and looking, and I kept like this is not right. There's something wrong with this water. That, looks like what we saw with the big sewage spill a couple years ago. This is like a repeat. And so it takes speaking up. It takes trusting your senses. We're just regular people. We're just regular community members here. There's nothing, I guess, special about us. We're just normal people. We all work. We've got life. We've got kids. We've got family. We all live here in these communities, and we just care. So it was just really just paying attention to my senses, what was happening to me while I was standing in that park. My eyes were burning. My throat started to hurt. I started sneezing like crazy when I was out there, and you could smell something, and people were saying, oh, that's just rotted vegetation. No, I know the difference. And to put it quite bluntly, I know the difference between some rotting vegetation and what poop smells like.
They will try to get you to question yourself like that. That's the
right, and
part.
we do to a degree question ourselves, but that's where that testing comes in,
right?
And so when we got the call from the business owner there in Titusville saying, hey, there's a problem over here at Spaceview, and we went over there, I mean, it was just, there was no doubt that there was something desperately wrong there. And we knew that something was going to come back in that test results, but we couldn't 100% say what it was. It just needed to be tested. And I'm glad Titusville followed through.
I agree. I do. And, speaking of the health impacts, that's something that I wanted to go over tonight. I'm very passionate about that. I'm planning on doing separate lives regarding my family's cancer and how that all came about with PFAS contamination and things like that. But specifically to pollution and water and what we're seeing here in Brevard County and the state of Florida as a whole, because we know that Brevard County isn't the only county that sees sewage spills. It's happening across the state, and it happens frequently, especially during the rainy season. And then these algal blooms are also happening across the state. And we see that especially during the summertime, because you've got the pollution going into the water, and then you've got the sun cooking the pollution, is how I put it. So
True.
I think, Libby, you can definitely speak on part of this, right? Because you got sick from polluted water with cyanobacteria. And a lot of people don't even know what that is. A lot of people don't even put two and two together. And that's why I thought this conversation was so important to have, because as we're putting the information out, I think people are starting to have that light bulb go off, and they're like, wait a minute, I had an infection. I had MRSA. I was in the hospital. I had to be on antibiotics. We just recently received numerous messages from people thanking us for bringing awareness to this.
So I too didn't know to put two and two together. When I went down on that canal, I surely didn't think it was toxic. I was trying to prevent it from becoming toxic, but I didn't know toxic from a hole in the ground. I didn't know anything, but I knew it was going to be bad because I saw my South Florida neighbors suffering a lot. And so it just so happened I had a South Florida environmental advocate who had been following me, and we'd been sharing stories on social media. I had just gotten the Facebook group started back then. It was called Edgewater Environmental Alliance. And a lot of the advocate friends came into the group to kind of support me and help me get people to look at this in Volusia County, because I didn't feel like there were many people looking at it. I certainly wasn't getting my questions answered. So you don't think to put two and two together, but I knew there was cyanobacteria. I knew it could look green. I knew it could look brown. I knew it could look even black if it was toxic. But I also knew that you couldn't tell if it was toxic unless you tested it. I knew that much. That's all I knew. So I can tell you the water I couldn't see because there was a carpet of muck on top of it. Now I know that was Lingbia mats. Okay. Benthic matting, another type of algae that mats. Okay. And that blocks the sunlight. So there's so many things that happen. And that dissolved oxygen drops. We had a little fish kill in that canal just a few weeks before I was exposed. So we did this work on the canal. That very night, I had burning, itching eyes, ears, nose, and throat, headaches, confusion. That night was so extreme. But let me just tell you, I had been having these experiences leading up to this extreme experience because I was doing canal cleanups every weekend on a Saturday. And then on the Sunday, I was doing island cleanups in the lagoon. We would do the island cleanups. So every weekend, I would notice by Sunday night, Monday, I was done. I needed a few days to sleep. I didn't know what was going on with me. I was like, wow, what is going on? This is really starting to catch up to me. But it wasn't until the day that we did the massive work on the canal where we removed the vegetation from the surface of the water. We put it on a tarp to dry and left it overnight per the city's instruction. And then I went back down the next morning before the island cleanup when it was dry and easier to scoop, and used a pitchfork to scoop it into, I lined a can with the bag, scooped it in. Well, now it was like this green cake that when I put it in, it created a green, like, powder in the air. And I was literally in that powder for about 2 hours doing this and bagging it and hauling it to the road. Little did I know that it was completely laden with various toxins that were not just getting into my lungs, my eyes, ears, nose, throat, skin, everywhere. Okay, I didn't know. The next day or that night, Sunday night, by the time I got home, I couldn't swallow. I could hardly breathe. I couldn't even lift my head off the couch. I posted something online like, God, I'm so sick. And I just put my symptoms. And somebody from South Florida said, have you been on water lately? It sounds like you've been exposed to cyanotoxins. And I said, well, it just so happens. And I told her my story. And she said, you need to go to the hospital. And I did. And I told them what had happened. And they said it was consistent with an environmental exposure. And so I just took it easy. I followed up with my doctor. I told the city straight away, oh my God, alarming everybody. There's toxins in the water. I'm sick. Please let people know. I didn't know this would happen. And do you know, they sent somebody to test the very next day, and it came back with the toxins in the water. They knew that within 24 hours. They didn't tell us about it for 3 months. We continued our work on that canal all the way down to the river. And it wasn't until we put the water goat in at the river where it discharges into the lagoon before they sent me the P-Tox report that showed that there were 4 different toxins in the water. So who did they notify straight away? Within 24 hours, they notified their liability carrier.
Can I play a trailer really quick? I'm going to play a trailer really quick. I think everyone should watch this documentary that lives in the state of Florida, because it goes over cyanobacteria, but specifically BMAA. And I don't know if a lot of people have watched this, but I think documentaries help give people a better understanding. Sometimes just talking about it, we're talking over people's head. They're like, they don't even know the word cyanobacteria, let alone what we're talking about. So let me go ahead and pull this up just really quick so we can.
People get this essentially have a death sentence. If I could discover a new drug, it would help millions of people. The big quest to me was to try find something to treat ALS. This is probably one of the worst diseases known.
It's the structure of scientific revolutions. Paul's a risk taker. I've seen the puzzle pieces go down. I think he's a winner.
The toxic puzzle has many pieces. One by one, they're falling into place. Science has opened up doors to a future which is both threatening and yet promising.
This is like a slow toxin, and it's a silent killer in a sense, because we don't know that it's in the water that we're drinking. We don't know it's in the food that we're eating, but we now know that it can cause these neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease.
For people who reach the age of 85, there's a 50-50 chance they're going to have Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is taking millions of people, and it's costing trillions of dollars.
Maybe soon, the scientists will lay down the missing piece.
Are we closer to a cure? I would say, I don't want to use the word cure, but I think we're close to prevention, and that's better than a cure.
Well, when you're this sick, there is never too much hope. Like, if you told me to lick a tree, I probably would. Yeah, I put all my hope in Paul because he's the only one that's ever given me like any inch of hope.
I've
So
seen that. I've seen that like so many times,
yeah,
and I watched it right after I was exposed. Marty Baum, who used to be the Indian River keeper, when he found out I had been, I'm going to cry. When he found out I'd been exposed, he told me I needed to watch that, and it was really eye-opening.
I think anyone who's watching our live, just watch. It will be eye-opening to what is going on with our waterways. You will look at everything so differently because you have these scientists and they're linking this stuff to ALS and Alzheimer's disease. And we do know in our county specifically, we've had a couple ALS cluster investigations, one being from the Kennedy Space Center workers. And they initially thought it was something that was happening with the launches. But then recently they came out and said, we think it may have been from the water. And so we have that somewhere in our group. I think if you look under space industry in our group, we have a clip of that where they're talking about that with the media. So that's just one small example of what this can do.
And a lot of people don't realize, while we're on this topic, I want to touch on this. It's cumulative. So repetitive exposure, it accumulates in your body. BMAA specifically, your brain receives it as a protein. It believes it's a protein. So it takes it in and it stores it. And it could be years before the symptoms begin to develop. So you could be 10, 20 years before you're seeing symptoms of that exposure.
And then you have, on top of this worry of ALS, and like you said, it could be years before you see the impacts of it. So anytime somebody says, well, I've swam in sewage my whole life and I'm fine. Well, you're fine now, but how are you going to be in 5 or 10 years? And what about your child when they're getting diseases in their early 20s? Because we're seeing a elevated rate of that, of young adults. We're not talking about the elderly population. We are talking about children. A high elevated rate of children with brain cancer in this county, youth that have blood cancer, leukemia, Hodgkin's, lymphoma. We're seeing high rates of liver cancer and stomach issues like Crohn's disease. And I know that, I don't know if Elizabeth feels comfortable talking about this, but she has family members that are facing those type of illnesses. So it's a mixture of things. Like if you have one pollution, you're bound to have other pollution issues. So we may have sewage pollution, but guess what? We also have PFAS pollution. We have plastic pollution. We have high levels of metals. We have legacy pollution from the space industry and the Department of Defense. So these are things that we have to all consider and continue to talk about the health impacts, because as you saw in that trailer, she said prevention is the key. Preventing disease is better than the cure, because people that have been impacted by this, I'm telling you right now, you do not want to be sitting in that chemo chair, taking in poison to save your freaking life. It is, you don't want to get to that point. Don't have the mindset of I'll deal with it when it comes, if it comes, because I can tell you, as somebody that didn't have a history of cancer in my family, I never fathomed I'd ever be facing cancer in my life. Never crossed my mind at the age of 26. And here I was watching a newborn daughter and my son, who is almost 5 years old, thinking, are they going to grow up without a mother? And all because of pollution. And this goes back to our why we fight. I know that
a lot of times people also, we say this, there's these clusters happening in our communities, brain cancers, this, that, there's kidney centers popping up everywhere. We all over the place. And I think that I digress. I had a friend that ultimately ended up passing away. He had MS, and he had a very, very aggressive form of MS, and he died way too young, and I miss him horribly. But one of the things that he said after he had gone to an MS support group early on in his diagnosis was that he didn't know that there were so many people that had MS or, whatever autoimmune disorder. And it hit him that you don't see them. You don't see the people with Parkinson's and MS and, ostomy bags because they're at home. It renders them unable to do things that we all do in our normal lives. We go to the grocery store, we go pick up our kids, I go to the park, I go do whatever I'm going to do in my daily life. And a lot of these diseases, these illnesses are so debilitating that they end up making people bedridden, homebound, their inability to move and flow throughout society like we do. And so we don't see nearly the number of people that are suffering from these kinds of conditions out in our everyday lives. We don't see them when we're going to work because a lot of times they can't work anymore. So, it's not, we do have a society that's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And, take into consideration that, like, for every one person that that has ALS or Parkinson's or MS or an intestinal disorder like Crohn's disease, that there's probably 20 more people in that community that are dealing with the same thing. You just haven't seen them. I miss him horribly, and he shouldn't have gone out the way he did, but he taught me some lessons, and I'm grateful for him. And that was one of them.
And we're just talking about, maybe I would say, venture to say, like, some of the most extreme cases. Like, everybody has their bodies are built differently. So when often people will say, well, I didn't get cancer, so it can't be real. It's like, you may not have cancer, but you may have neurological issues from it. You may have gotten flesh-eating bacteria. You may have gotten a UTI, something as simple as a UTI, a urinary tract infection from the water because you're swimming in sewage. A lot of doctors will say, well, are you wiping right? No, I'm like literally swimming in sewage in my bathing suit. Think about that, ladies, because a lot of people don't put that together. So think, have I just swam in the lagoon? Is that why I have this infection? And make sure you're communicating this and advocating for yourself to your doctor. Let them know. Well, they may look at you like you're crazy. Trust me, I have all kinds of stories about healthcare. It's all coming out in my new book. I'm talking about the 6 doctors it took for me to get my cancer diagnosis. But you are your own best advocate. And I know it's difficult. I know it's hard. I know so many people have dealt with getting gaslit at a doctor's office, being told, oh, well, you're just emotional. It's just anxiety. It's just this.
It's the flu. It's your allergies.
It's allergies, yes. Or maybe you have asthma. I mean, that was one of my diagnoses.
Or maybe you have psychiatric problems.
Right. Yeah. They threw an inhaler at me. And it wasn't until the 6th doctor that told me I had a 13-centimeter tumor in my chest. They threw an inhaler at me, said it was probably asthma.
Jesus.
That was there. So just know you are your own best advocate. We also have stories of flesh-eating bacteria.
Yeah.
This is the most recent flesh-eating bacteria story about a Florida fisherman who was recovering from it after sticking his hand in the northern Indian River Lagoon.
That was Daniel Richards from Oak Hill. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, and some people don't even know what that is. And that's why we're always saying, do not go in these waterways with an open cut. And if you get cut, make sure every time you do go to the waterways in Florida, I don't care if it's the ocean, always have a first aid kit with you. Always. Never go swimming somewhere without a first aid kit. in
Mhm.
natural waters, whether it's the ocean, whether it's, the river, wherever you choose to swim, always have a first aid kit and iodine on you. You got to clean those cuts out if you get cut. Wear your water shoes. There's simple things you can do to protect yourself. For me, I will not swim during the hottest months of the year in the lagoon or any polluted waterway, because again, this is how I put it, the pollution is cooking under that sun.
Mhm. The algae's blooming.
The algae's blooming.
So I think with our current situation, knowing that we absolutely have evidence of a strong presence of sewage in the North Indian River Lagoon right now, I encourage people to just get online, Google what some of the effects of being exposed to sewage are. I did so this afternoon, because even though I'm aware, I don't know everything by any means. So I just kind of want to go through this real quick. And we're talking about salmonella, roundworms, parasites, hookworms, encephalitis, hepatitis A, gastroenteritis, cryptosporidosis, E. coli, typhoid fever, leptospirosis. Some of these things, you don't get symptoms right away. Most of them, actually, it's 4 to 7 days after exposure. So a week later, you're not even thinking about, oh, well, I was just in the water. You're thinking, like, what did I eat? What did I eat this morning? Did that coffee upset my stomach? And some of the symptoms to look out for are stomach pain, cramping, bloody or watery stool, fever, rashes, red eyes, sore throat. A lot of those things from some of these waterborne illnesses, if they're not treated properly, can lead to death. They can lead to liver failure. They can lead to kidney failure. And though death is somewhat rare, it happens. And you don't want to be a victim of that. And then this is just the short list. There's not really that list went on and on and on. We only have limited time here, but this is pretty darn scary. One of these things, the cryptosporidosis, or crypto, is the most common waterborne disease in the United States. And it also happens to be extremely resistant to chlorine disinfectants. So they will close down a swimming pool if they find these things in here. They will close down a beach if they find these things in here. And I think that we had that discussion on what is the river? Like, is that a beach? Is that, I consider it a beach here in Titusville near the Max Brewer Bridge. That's a beach area, but there may be some legal environmental description that I don't know of. I don't know if it's considered necessarily a public swimming area, but it is definitely used for a public swimming area. So as I was driving over that bridge last week and saw the hundreds and hundreds of people out there playing in the water with their children and their pets, I was sick. I was absolutely sick. This panic went through me that when the big sewage spill happened and we tried to go out there and warn people,
and then a child is forever, his life is forever altered. Even though we tried to warn people, even though we tried to put the message out, even though citizens put their own signs up, people still did not know, and they still got in that water not knowing they were swimming in sewage. And that is why we do what we do.
The city could have done something about that. And I don't want to necessarily digress, but you have to look at what was done wrong to prevent it from happening again. And what was done wrong was the city went on with business as usual and failed to warn the residents of the inherent danger of being exposed to the pathogens and bacteria that were in that water. They knew it was there. They had a duty to warn. They failed to warn. Those residents rely on the city to give that warning. So that's where it happened. This is 100% the fault of the city, not the fault of the residents. We did our best to warn, but there's only so much you can do. If an authoritative figure like your government is not acknowledging a problem, most residents believe their government agencies. They're not going to listen to us trying to warn them, especially when they then go to their government agency and say, hey, Libby and Stel said this. And then the government agency said, oh, they're crazy. They're lying. They don't know. Ignore them. Don't talk to them. It's safe. You're fine. The river's looking real healthy.
And somebody said that they were talking about their dog and how there's been a lot of diseases in dogs, for instance, like aggressive form of lymphoma. I brought that comment up earlier. And that's another part of this. There just recently, this past week, we got a message from somebody saying that they had to take their dog to the vet because they took their dog swimming in the lagoon in that exact area. And guess what happened? The dog started vomiting. And so there's like susceptible, kids are susceptible, elderly susceptible, animals are susceptible. People with strong immune systems may not be impacted right away. And then, Elizabeth, you were talking about that group of people that were at the beach. It kind of reminds me of the West Coast when we went over there for the screening of phosphate and red tide was actively happening over there. And Elizabeth and I wanted to go and document it. And we thought we were just going to go and we were going to see thousands and thousands and thousands of deceased fish on the beach. But what we stumbled across was much more shocking. I've never seen anything like this, where we show up to the beach and there are people laying among the fish with their beach towels, laying with the fish, with this awful stench.
They were hacking their lungs.
They were hacking.
They were coughing.
They were laying there.
And they're drinking their beer. They're laying in the sun. They're hacking their lungs up, and they're just like, and they're looking at us like we're crazy because we were wearing very highly protective masks, and we couldn't breathe. I mean, that red tide was so strong. I mean, we were out there for
It'll take your breath away.
Minutes. Yeah, it was absolutely horrible. But here's all these tourists laying on the beach, soaking up the rays and breathing all this in and just coughing their heads off. And they were like, we're on vacation and we're committed, which I get that they don't know. And there weren't any warnings. And the city over there didn't shut the beach down. And, often we hear, well, they would have told us. Not necessarily.
That's a whole other level of disconnection, though, when there are dead fish at your feet and a stench that's undeniable. Okay, I don't think I need a government to tell me something's wrong there. That's a major disconnect.
And that's the disconnect we see time and time again among people in Florida. And I think part of it, a lot of us that are native, that grew up here, we know what the water is supposed to look like. A lot of the people that we talk to that say, oh, I just moved here a year ago or even 5 years ago, they tell us, we've asked them, we've talked to them at boat ramps, and they're like, oh, I thought that this is what the water was supposed to look like. I thought that's just what it looked like. And we're like, do you realize that we could look across the Indian River Lagoon to the Space Center and see seagrass, and you could see life. You could see to the bottom when you looked over the boat ramp. As a girl, I would scoop up seahorses, and we'd have to do the shuffle and we will start explaining what it was when we were little to them. And it gets them thinking, like, I didn't realize that this wasn't normal.
Right.
That this is not what the lagoon is supposed to smell or look like. And so I think that it's so important to continue bringing this education and knowledge and information, and for anyone that's a newcomer to also get educated on it, because we need you to be informed so you can help us continue to try to fight for these fisheries and these natural resources. We're losing our fisheries.
The
So
clamming industry, I go back to that every time. Back in the 80s, and prior to that, Brevard County used to supply like something like a third of the world's clams. There was a huge industry here for that. And there were people back then fighting to stop some of the pollution and some of the fishing practices, and they were unable to. And unfortunately, a lot of the big commercial outfitters came in and dredged up the rivers even back then, destroying seagrass beds. They overfished. They took a lot of our filter feeders out. So as pollution increased with population and with development, our filter feeders were also taken away. So it tipped the scales there, and we haven't recovered from it since the 80s. I mean,
Let me add to that. So speaking of the clams, because as you know, I was involved in the clam restoration project. And what I learned in that project that actually happened was the St. Johns River Water Management District, because of the dragline ditching that they had done, they were going in to try to repair the damage that was done to the ecosystem in 2 different phases, and they failed to carry out phase 2. Phase 1 was dragging the vegetation, mangroves and everything, into the ditches. Phase 2 would have been to remove that vegetation. Instead, they just left it to rot. So naturally, all of that, the nutrients, the pollution fed the bloom. And that was the 2013, the brown tide, the major brown tide that happened, that devastated, that wiped the rest of the clam farms away. Mike Sullivan, who was one of the leading suppliers, supplied all of Disney's clams, lost his entire farm. He actually found a species of clams down in Mosquito Lagoon over there by JB's Fish Camp in New Smyrna Beach. Just like the Chernobyl clam is what he calls it, because it lived through all this devastation. So clearly that's the brood stock we want. And he has now lined the lagoon where he can, where it's safe to, which is not very many places. JB's is one location, with these clams to try to clean, because they're filter feeders, to try to clean the water. The problem is we continue to dump the pollution and increase the pollution. So it's hard to say how much benefit's really coming. But when we see the water clear up, those clams are going to come back. One thing I know now that I've worked on that project, it will all come back, but we've got to stop polluting it.
Yeah, if we leave Mother Nature alone, she takes care of herself.
Well, she does, but that's funny, because St. John said, oh, Mother Nature will take care of itself. That was their justification for not continuing the project. But Mother Nature didn't do that to herself in the first place.
Right. Well, so, and when I say we leave her alone,
to finish the project.
Yeah, we have to stop those sources of pollution, and we have to stop doing that. That's what I mean by leaving Mother Nature alone. You got to quit messing with her, quit poking holes in her, quit dumping plastic on her, quit dumping sewage on her, and pay attention to what's going on here. I know a lot of people get really, really, really upset with us, and they'll want to blame one source. They'll say, oh, it's the septic tanks. No, it's not just the septic tanks. I'm sure that's contributing some. Oh, it's just that sewage spill that happened. No, it's not just that either. This is multiple sources of pollution. This is the way, and I do believe that we all have an individual responsibility to do the best that we can, but we also need to place some responsibility on our local governments, the people that are making the decisions for the building, for where pipes are, for whether septic tanks are allowed or not. Once again, the EPA told Brevard County years and years and years ago that septic tanks were not a good idea, that they were going to harm the lagoon. What'd they do? They said, well, we're going to build these communities anyway, and here's some permits for septic tanks. It's like, if it has a permit, it's okay. No, if it has a permit, it was bought. That's There's the difference. So we have multiple sources that we need to be looking at here, and quit pretending like it's just one thing. We have to come at this from all angles, and everybody's got to be working together, or we're just not going to get anywhere.
And
Step 5,000 cuts.
Yeah, speaking of sources of pollution, is there any updates with the fuel terminal in Volusia County?
So they had a major meeting at the city, at the City of Ormond Beach Commission meeting, which is where Belvedere Terminals plans to build the fuel farm. And it was a record turnout, just like the Volusia County Council meeting. The Volusia County Council members came to the meeting and spoke at the meeting. There seems to be a shift. Initially, all of the elected officials have spoken out against this farm, and there's no doubt why. It would be political suicide to speak out in favor of this farm, especially now with, excuse me, with the major outpouring of the community. They did letters to basically the delegation, all of the senators and representatives. They did a letter to DEP. They did a letter to Belvedere. They will be meeting, they by they, I mean the county and the city staff will be meeting with Belvedere Terminals. The property is actually owned by Florida East Coast Railway, who was just purchased recently in the last few years by Grupo Mexico. Grupo Mexico has an abysmal, County Chair Brower said it was dismal. I'm going to go one step further to say it's abysmal record of safety. They've had fires, explosions, tankers. They have had numerous problems. That's why they're not operating under their name. That's why they created a whole new corporation. It's kind of like these hedge funds that get moved around so nobody knows who the owner is. You know what I mean? But we know who they are. So FEC owns the property. So basically they're looking at various other areas. As you know, Brevard County is one of them. And they're going to try to convince them to go somewhere else. So we're waiting to see what happens with those conversations. And we're also waiting to see what our state representatives are going to step up and do, besides just saying, I'm against it. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do about it?
Well, I was going to say, because the laws are written to protect the polluters, and that's why the right to clean water has taken hold in a lot of communities and across the state. And it is very concerning because we're talking about, we want to stop the pollution sources. And it seems like the state of Florida has a big welcome sign for all polluters to come into the state. It's like we're a sacrificial zone in the state of Florida. Why are we welcoming and opening our state up to more polluters and more pollution, just more problems to continue to combat in the future, when we're not even done combating what we did 30, 40, 50 years ago to these waterways? I mean, we've been rated the #1 for most polluted lakes in the nation. We have the 3rd highest perfluorinated compounds. We have, we're #1 in microplastics. We have an unusual mortality event with manatees. When are we going to stop the pollution source? We can't keep inviting all of these industries in if we don't have a plan to hold them accountable to be responsible in our communities and for our waterways.
It's the corruption. It's straight away. It's the corruption. Like I said, there's a shift. Initially, everyone's against it, but we have seen a shift. At the county council meeting, Councilman Santiago actually tried to shut Chairman Brower down from having a discussion during his own closing comments about the fuel farm. He basically went so far as to say, I just want to protect you. You don't know what you're doing. You don't want to say anything. Like, it was almost like Voldemort, he who shall not be named. It was so crazy. And Councilman Troy Kent, who Ormond Beach is his district, and he was the one who first came out and said, please help me stop this. But that's because he was getting all of his constituents calling him. He had to make that position. I wanted to see if he'd live up to it. He actually was silent, completely silent during this discussion about the fuel farm, but for a few little comments that really didn't had no substance. And in fact, when Santiago kept chiding the chair, he was smirking and joking with them. And they don't realize we can all see this. We can all see what you're doing. And we've become very adept at reading your body language and your sign language because we have to, because you're not honest. You're not transparent. So we have had to become very accustomed at reading your body language and your behavior. We know you're not going to sit up there and tell us the truth. We have to look for it. It's unfortunate, but true. So now that we've seen this shift, it's very clear that people are being contacted and that their loyalties are shifting.
Isn't it interesting what can be done when a lot of residents come together? The community basically demands that their representatives do what they were elected to do and represent them.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep that in mind. You know, a lot of people feel so powerless. And I had an interview with a news outlet this past week, and that was something I brought forward. They said, is there anything else you want to add to this story? And I said, well, I think a lot of people have lost hope. I think a lot of people just think, you know, the lagoon's dead. There's nothing we can do. And they feel so powerless. But I also think that they just don't have the know-how and the resources and how to make that difference. And I think if they knew and realized the power of unity and coming together and using their voices and taking action, what that could do.
You said it, unity. I mean, that's what we're seeing in Volusia County with this turnout in Jacksonville. They're doing it up there with this fuel farm too. And we've seen it with the manatees and our marches. When we come together, the whole state did those bridge marches that year. We all did it on the same day. That's unity. That gets things done. That gets people's attention.
It sure does.
So you're living proof of how one voice can make a difference. You started this journey back when you had your cancer, and you have been nonstop. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, people looked at you like you were crazy when you started talking about PFAS chemicals. You know, just a few years ago, people were looking at me like I was crazy when I was talking about the connection between PFAS and microplastics. And now all of a sudden, on every major news outlet, they're reporting that PFAS is in the drinking water of 50% of Americans. Like, now, municipalities are dealing with it. States are starting to acknowledge it. This wasn't a made-up thing. Holy moly, Stel Bailey was right all along. You know, you went and testified before Congress. You're getting ready to go meet with the EPA again. You get a very exciting trip coming up. And, like, this is absolute proof. So anybody out there that doesn't think that their voice matters, start using it. See what happens.
I just want to say, Stel, I'm going to mention the rally that we're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
Shaping, what do we call it? I forgot already.
The Tallahassee.
Shaping Tomorrow Together rally, October 18th from 3 to 5 p.m. at the historic Capitol building. We will be there with the League, here I go again, the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, Fight for Zero. Stel Bailey will be speaking at the event. Thank you, Stel. Rethink Energy, LULAC. There's so many organizations involved, and that is exactly what we've done, come together in unity. But I don't want to end that. I just wanted to throw that out there and shut up for a minute, because I want you to talk about these upcoming events for the PFAS.
Yes. So we do. We have an update. I'll take this off the bottom. So on October 5th, 2023, 5:30 p.m. in less than a month, about at the beginning of October, please mark your calendars. This is going to be live streamed, but we also have a Zoom link, and we really need feedback from the Brevard County community. This is going over the PFAS data that we've collected for the past 3 years. And this is with a team who has not only collected PFAS data in Brevard County, but across the state of Florida. Their data is so extensive. It is tremendous and phenomenal. their team has not only done it on surface water, which is also known as like the Indian River Lagoon, your lakes, but they've also done it on drinking water. They've even tested dragonflies to see if PFAS is in dragonflies. And in our particular study here in Brevard County, we were seeing how PFAS was moving with floodwaters. And so places like Merritt Island, who has significant flooding issues, you're being impacted by this. You have PFAS contamination. So if you live in Brevard County, we need all cities, Titusville, Cocoa had some high levels, and it was in some of the vulnerable areas of the city of Cocoa, which is interesting because I know there was one area that had sewage issues and it's hitting high. Satellite Beach, South Patrick Shores, Melbourne, Palm Bay with your FAR Chemical Company. If you can, the best thing you can do to help is share, get people to tune in, because what we really need is the community's feedback. We need your voices and your input in this. We need you to come here, tell us what more you would like to see. Do you want more data on drinking water? Do you want to start doing blood testing? We need your input, because it's not worth it unless the community engages and says, this is what we want. So please come to this meeting. The other meeting that we're having is on October 15th. This is separate, has nothing to do with that meeting. On October 15th, we are having a town hall with a law firm, and it's for the victims and families of PFAS contamination. We're going to start with the city of Satellite Beach. So anyone that that lives in Satellite Beach, South Patrick Shores, or who lived and worked at Patrick Space Force Base, previously Patrick Air Force Base, you are going to want to attend this meeting. It is at 3 p.m. We will have that attorney resource for you. They will be there to do a presentation and explain how families are being compensated for being contaminated and their personal injuries from this. So we will be sharing that information soon, but in the meantime, please write it on your calendars and get the word out. The best thing you can do, again, is get the word out. You want your neighbors, you want your family members to get the information and have the information. By the way, it's not just for victims. If you've lost a loved one to cancer and you've lost somebody that this PFAS contamination is connected to, you are welcome to come too, because you can file on behalf of your family member. I was going to bring up the Tallahassee rally. I'll put it back down here. Mark your calendars, October 18th. I know it's very far away from where we live here on the East Coast, but we're really hoping people come up and rally with us, meet with some legislators. It's going to be a really, really good time, and we'll be pushing out that information as well. And then this one isn't as much for the community, so I'm not going to put it up, but there's a stakeholder meeting. So if you are a part of the Indian River Lagoon Committee, or you're a legislator's assistant that's watching this live stream, mark your calendar for October 23rd for 10 a.m. We are having a stakeholder meeting to discuss how we are going to clean up PFAS in Brevard County. That so far is the only dates that I have available. Are there any updates you guys have?
I already gave mine.
Okay.
So mine just seems like peanuts compared to all of that.
Oh, stop. You actually got something really good accomplished and you need to share it.
I did get something really good accomplished. So the Walmart store in Titusville was just absolutely inundated on their property with garbage. There was just so much on there. There were bottles of oil, there were razors, there were just trash everywhere, especially along like the northwest property line, and that's a really big property. So after trying to work with Walmart, and they kind of gave me the cold shoulder, they didn't really want to talk to me about it anymore. I eventually called the code enforcement in Titusville. They did go out and investigate. They issued a code enforcement violation notice. that went ignored for 30 days. They gave them another 10 days to clean it up. And Walmart has now hired someone to go out there a couple days a week and pick up trash on the property. And I am pleased about that. I appreciate Officer Frank Lewis for the work that he did there. And now, after the result of some of that, because I don't feel like the cleanup was I'll say it was somewhat adequate. It was appeasing. That now I'm very concerned about the condition of the water in that area. There's a very large area that is wetland, and I have reported that to DEP, and we're waiting to see what happens with that. The water is orange. It looks like sludge. It's certainly not healthy. So, whatever the findings are, they are. I have no control over that. It just is what it is. But I'm doing my best to try to bring some awareness to these, again, another huge corporation coming into our area and just being absolutely negligent with how they're treating our land here. I mean, it may belong to them technically, but this is part of a community where people deserve to live happily and cleanly. And it irritates me every time I see a Walmart ad where they say live better, because they need to do better.
The good thing about you doing this is, you're navigating this, but you're also creating a roadmap for how other communities across the nation can deal with this.
Right.
Because
right.
as we know, this isn't just a Titusville Walmart. This is happening across. If you Google this issue with the waste and their properties, it's happening nationwide. And there have been numerous communities that have been trying to take this on. So I think you're on a really good path to now reaching out nationally and helping those people and those communities that have been dealing with this and don't really have any direction on. And so you're going through all the right avenues, and that's what it takes. You started where you started, and now you're kind of navigating.
Right. And ultimately, what I want to see is Walmart adopt better waste management strategies. I mean, that's it. I want to see them handle their waste. I don't care who's throwing it on the ground. I get a lot of attacks. You've seen that. I get a lot of, you're blaming Walmart, or it's the homeless people, or I don't care who threw it on the ground. It's on their property. They need to be responsible. If somebody litters in my yard, I have to pick it up. They have to pick up their property as well. So, unfortunately, it has gone, it's just been left there for so long that now it's a big mess rather than just a little bit of trash. It really has caused a pollution area. So
I have one more update, and it's because I wasn't able to update last time, Libby. I just wanted to let everyone know that's watching this live stream that about a week ago, I did have a meeting with the chair of the Save Our Indian River Lagoon Committee. I just wanted to put that on the record. It was a very long meeting. I think it was pretty productive. We had a lot of conversations, and they had some concerns, and I shared some of our concerns with them. And so I had invited him to come on one of these live streams, and I told him we're still working out all the bells and whistles of this whole tech thing, but so once I get back and settled back in, I've got a lot happening in the upcoming almost 2 months, but I would love for him to come on here, anyone that's a part of that committee or just the lagoon groups, because I think we need to be going through the weeds of that conversation. There's been, one of their concerns was they're getting lumped into all of the other groups, and it's hard to navigate, so that's one. And they don't want to lose support. They don't. And so I think we should invite them to come and have these conversations and let them help us navigate some of this stuff too. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that particular. I kind of went over that meeting with the whole team and all the volunteers. I'm always trying to bring back all the information to the volunteers because I always want their input. I value your guys' input a lot.
We need all the voices at the table. I mean, all of the voices at the table. So I welcome him and I look forward to that conversation.
No, it's good. Yeah, I agree.
I
So
do too.
this is a great closeout because we're a little over, but I think we're doing good tonight. Collaboration between groups will be amazing. Strength in numbers. Exactly. Strength in numbers. That's why you see us three on here every Friday. But we all have, Libby started the Volusia Brevard County Environmental Alliance group. You've got Elizabeth with I Pick Up Litter, and then having people from the Right to Clean Water. Just that collaboration is what's going to make us stronger across the state of Florida. And having your voice, your input, and your action is also going to make this protecting our natural resources so much stronger. Because if you care about your waterways, if you care about your health and our wildlife, and the fisheries, and even our farmers, because water impacts them. It impacts their animals, and it impacts our food at the end of the day. So this is a really important fight, and I think a lot of times it gets pushed on the back burner, but it's impacting so much more than I think people realize. So
Anyway,
anyway,
there is a little bit of a time crunch with the
Yeah.
Right to Clean Water. So I do want to remind people, please go to FloridaRightToCleanWater.org. Print out your petition, sign it, send it. If you can get 10 other people to sign, that would be awesome too. So it is FloridaRightToCleanWater.org. It is extremely important because as it stands, none of us have an actual legal right to clean water. We got to change that.
That's right.
With that being said, I am going to end this. I think what I want to do though is I want to end this with a video. You guys can stay on because when it ends, it ends. But I just love this video because it shows all the hard work and all the cancer survivors and everyone. Not everyone is at the forefront. Like all of us put our faces out there, but not everyone in Fight for Zero does that. So you guys have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful night.
Well, when did the bar become set so low that any trace of any chemical was safe?